All right, what to talk about tonight? Um, I don't feel like I'm in any rush tonight. I feel like I've had enough time to sit around and talk. Question is, what should we talk about? Plenty to think about. Plenty to think about. Um, just now, I mean, I had stuff in my mind earlier, but it's not like there's any order to this. There's no agenda here. Um, but I had just been watching a video. What is this gentleman's name? Um, I'm starting to dive into places in YouTube that I never been. Richard D. Wolff, um, enjoying his commentary on a great many things. He's an economics professor at New School, and worth his salt. Um, so I was learning about. I never. I like to. Well, I don't like to. I so far in my understanding of things like neoliberalism have been, not surprisingly, very self-centered in my understanding of them and how they came about and why they came about. And by that I mean I put that concept squarely in the, uh, you know, I pinned it as being the responsibility of American leadership, that we made the deals and legislation and trade law and agreements that we did because we wanted to change the way that the world worked, because we wanted our corporate America to be able to exist in a different form. Or rather, I should say, because corporate America was able to find a voice or find representation in our government in ways that it previously couldn't, and that's where this came from. But I overlooked that one of the main impetus for this being the way that it is because of the leadership and foresight of China, making themselves available as labor to be a production facility for the globe. That they put themselves out there in a way that made it possible for them to communicate and participate in a capitalist, transnationalist, globalist system, and it wasn't done. It wasn't done out of ignorance, and it wasn't done out of uh, just eagerness. It was actually calculated, and there were certain stipulations that were required in order for us to take advantage of the things that they were offering, and they were very strategic about the way that they entered into the world stage. And I think that what I'm seeing is that it really wasn't so much a choice that we made as a country to try to touch the world with capitalism, but it was more a relationship that we entered into in many ways with China. I mean, that to me seems ignorant, and I have the right to be ignorant on my own journal, but you can't really call a transnationalist capitalist a neoliberal globalist perspective of the world simply the relationship between two countries. That's not global. That is a trade deal, and so there has to be other moving parts to this ecosystem. It's not just the United States and China. Um, but there definitely seems to be the most interesting things in broad strokes happening between those two countries, and among those two countries, individually and together. Um, so neoliberalism really is not just a brand of capitalism that we settled on as a corporate entity. The capitalists. It's not something that American capitalists settled on. It's something that American capitalists, corporate America, settled on in cooperation with a strategic decision on behalf of the state of China. Uh, Among, I suppose, other things. But you know, who really was at the heart of that? What were all the players? Again, all right. So here's some more research for you, self. Where did this come from? Who were the players? How did this happen? I like to poke at things like Ronald Reagan and the changes in tax incentivization and structures, so that you know the wealthy don't have to pay out as much. Um, because if the wealthy can spend more, then somehow we'll have a, gosh, wow. It could have read one history book. Anyway, and then you know Clinton and Bush and Obama, like it. Other policy differences aside, these are trends that never changed direction. And I'm not sure really what happened under Trump in this regard, because Trump was so busy making a mess out of everything else stateside that it's really difficult to see, as a you know an average citizen, what aside from declaring himself emperor of the United States is he trying to accomplish. And my natural inclination was not anything good, because I mean he's going to be a petulant child and he's going to throw a fit whenever anybody doesn't let him have what he wants. But at the same time, he's run every business that he's ever had into the ground. He's reneged on any contract that he's ever made. He bashes people um, publicly. He can't take any criticism or responsibility or blame whatsoever for anything that he does. So it just didn't follow that there would be anything he could be capable of other than damaging existing deals or damaging reputation or getting swindled, really, because if there's not somebody else that's capable of speaking for him or preventing him from doing something disastrous, he could very easily be goaded into doing something disastrous, making a disastrous choice. So, so I have absolutely no hope that upon further review, you know, looking back, that I would see anything notably promising in his economic or international policy. Um, but at the very least, the level of competence required to maintain the course was absent. So, so we couldn't even do as bad as we were doing, is my overall impression. Um, but again, that impression deserves, you know, a look to determine whether or not that's true, that bears out in what actually happened in terms of policy and legislation and agreements that were signed and enacted. Um, so that's what I was thinking about. What was the rest of my day like? I feel like there were definitely more things to talk about. I spent some of my evening looking at this GameStop situation. You know, here's an interesting thought. There seems to be a phenomenon called, you know, these folks on Reddit, r/Wall Street Bets, I think. Um, and I have no idea what sort of a community that is, but I've had people tell me what they think it is. Um, and I don't think that the R Wall Street Bets community is the working class. I don't think that it's an amusement that people, you know, dig into in order to distract themselves from their jobs. I think it's probably folks who already have an interest in things like day trading and already have some degree of liquid assets on hand and have some inclination to participate in the world of investments. So it's not just your, you know, average Joe that frequents that site, but nevertheless, they still have found themselves in a position of somewhat of an underdog, and that they collectively have exploited a hedge fund's position in some stocks, most notably GameStop, that the hedge fund has shorted some of these stocks, some of these companies pretty significantly, and these Redditors, because I don't really know exactly who they are, have taken advantage of that shorted position and bought into the stock pretty significantly as a collective, which threatens the hedge fund's investment shorting the stock, meaning that the the hedge fund might actually be in a position where they will have to pay out to cover any difference between where they shorted it and where it is now, meaning the hedge fund could stand to lose a significant amount of money if the firm decides to close them and recall the close the account and stop the short. But there's a question as to whether or not that would actually happen, because as long as the hedge fund wants to remain invested, and as long as the firm believes that the hedge fund can cover its losses should it choose to leave the agreement, then there's not really any need for anybody to move their position. The weak link in the chain seems to be, well, eventually all of these Redditor people will want their money back, and they'll get out, or they'll want to take their profit and run, right? And as soon as a couple start doing so, then the gig is up, and people have to vacate lest they lose their position. So it really depends on what is the end game for Reddit. If the end game is here's a whole bunch of people who saw an opportunity to exploit a position that a hedge fund had found themselves in, then some of the folks have already accomplished that, and it's reaching a peak, and they are good to get out. Which, based on the community there, it probably is likely that that is what's happening. They've successfully taken advantage of the situation and will sell, because that's why they were there, was to make some money, and they've made a good amount of money. If instead the objective of this collective is to put the hedge fund in an uncomfortable position, then it really does become a matter of who blinks first. And that actually is not, it's not nearly as interesting as I thought, because the hedge fund, it has a a massive amount of different investments. They are not betting everything on one investment, that they have one stock, one company. So if things went absolutely belly up with GameStop and the firm decided they did have to call in their debts, then the hedge fund would have more than enough to cover that based on their other investments, and they would still move on. So it's not like these Redditor folks are holding a knife to the hedge fund's neck by capturing the stock and refusing to move off of it. But it would be really nice if the hedge fund did, because then that position would change significantly, and then all the Redditors would walk away very, very happy. But that's unlikely to happen, because again, how would they push them out? The only way they would be pushed out is if the hedge fund blinked and said, okay, these guys don't seem to be moving, so let's just lose a bunch of money. But again, they can weather it. That's the whole point of the capital, right? Is they can, these are assets that they can afford to lose. It's not, anybody's food that they're talking about. They're going to be able to keep their house and yada, yada, yada. They will keep the company even. The hedge fund will stay in business. Meanwhile, all of these individual investors, they might actually be overextended in respect to they have invested money that they actually will at some point need. And if they've invested money that they will at some point need, and they just can't leave it there for 20 years, then it is just a waiting game. The only reason it would not be a waiting game is for some reason the firm decided, I need to call in this debt and I need to force the hedge fund to sell out its position, which would only happen if the firm felt like the hedge fund was compromised in some way and there was a chance that they wouldn't be able to pay out. So how could that happen? That could happen by a ridiculous amount more of folks buying into these stocks that are leveraged by hedge funds and driving the price up so much that that the position that the hedge fund is in is like so ridiculously problematic that the firm is like, okay, we now have to call this in because we're standing to not standing to lose, but like you bought in by paying $100 million, and in order for you to buy out, no, $100 million, you bought in at $10 million, and in order for you to get out, now it's going to be like uh, $20 billion or something like that. Then it's like I trust that you have the money, I do, but like this is we're way sticking our necks out for you at this point. But are they? Like that's the problem. Is like you're talking about a hedge fund and a stock firm. I can't even think of the word. Um, well, anyway, the pockets are deep on both ends, and they want to maintain the relationship. It's not like these folks are trying to antagonize one another. So does it really matter? It's like leaving your PlayStation at a friend's house. It's like, I mean, yeah, that's a lot of money worth of stuff. And yeah, I don't have my eyes on it, but it's fine. At what point, like when you're thinking about your best friend, at what point do you say, oh shoot, if there was a fire at my best friend's house right now, I would lose all the stuff that I'm loaning them. And maybe I'm loaning them like $5 grand worth of stuff. Is it worth damaging my friendship to ask them to give all that stuff back just because their house might burn down? I mean, they do play with matches a lot. I'm sure it's fine. Like it's where I don't know how to quantify that. But bottom line, I don't think that the original reason I thought it was interesting was because I thought it represented some opportunity for collective action to exploit, these hedge fund type environments, risk-based financial capital. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm tired. But it doesn't seem to be that, because again, how many people would it take to collectively enter into an antagonistic relationship, financial relationship, with a firm like with a hedge fund, and be able to buy them out of that position? Because the average person, discretionary income that they can set aside and bet and lose, and never have to worry about buying bread or paying rent or utilities with, is probably not sufficient to buy out the position of a hedge fund. And not only that, but you're talking about one investment that they've made. GameStop is one investment that this organization that's business is to maintain so many different investments that they're never really truly at risk, even though they have a whole bunch of high risk investments, because those investments are so diversified that the high risk investments, out of nature of being diversified, become low risk. So you would have to surround them on every side. You'd have to buy them out all the way around. And I don't know that there exists that collective financial power. And if there was, it would have to be organized. And if it was organized and it did exist and it could be surrounded and the information was there to exploit, even then you'd have to be counting on whatever firm sold them the shorted stock calling that back. And the only reason that would probably happen is if the hedge fund became so incredibly overextended with all of these different risky positions that not everybody would get their money back. So like you would have to, some people would call and say, okay, you have to pay this off first. And then other people would call and say, don't forget to pay off ours, but it's too late, there's no money there. But why would you cause your friend's house to foreclose? Like, why would you call and say, like, hey, this guy over here that I've known for 10 years, you should, or 50 or 100 years, you should foreclose on his house? I think there's some degree of solidarity in these institutions, right? That's probably not. And even then, can they just like change the price of bread or something, so that you know, now everybody who was invested has to pull out and go home because they weren't previously food insecure, but now they are because somebody's just like, make bread $1,000. You know, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know exactly what we're dealing with here. This is just, it's interesting to look at, but I don't see it as being super significant in that regard. Somebody sent me a message that said something financial warfare, and I'm like, what a hilarious. I've never imagined those words coming together. All right, hold on. I'm actually checking notifications while I'm talking, and that's not right. I meant to open up, see if I wrote anything in my inevitable video journal. What does this say? Here's stuff that I wrote today, and I don't even remember what it says, but it's a lot, so I'm just going to read it, and it's not going to make sense, and it's going to be a spoiler for anything that I could try to talk about. What do I write when I write to myself in my notepad to say, don't forget to talk about these things later? It says, discourse requires ideology and understanding, belief, historical context. What should we do? Why should we do it? What happens if we do? What happens if we don't? Discourse should take place in the public forum, among citizens, among the representatives. But if citizens don't have ideology, if citizens don't have understanding, if citizens don't know what we do and why we do it and what happens if we do it and what happens if we don't, then they will not know who represents them. Maybe it's the issues. Maybe I want someone who feels the same way on issues as I do. I don't know why they feel that way. I don't know what feeling that way will do for anyone. I don't know what I want. I don't know why I want it. Society can be built. Society is a science, but one we all participate in, whether we know it or not. So we vote. We vote based on issues, at best. At worst, we vote based on colors, parties, red or blue. And we think that when we vote, the issues go in our favor. And when the issues go in our favor, magic happens. And the magic is what makes the society. The magic makes it all work. Wow. We are so helplessly ignorant, so defenseless, so uneducated, so lost, it's a mess. This is the note that I wrote to myself earlier to say, you know, before I forget this, you should talk about this. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that that who you vote for to represent you in a democracy depends on the nature of the public discourse, or discourse in the public forum about who that candidate is and what they stand for and why you're voting for them in the first place. And usually there's a couple of different ways in which that happens now. Either we are so incredibly attached to the idea of a political party that it can boil down to, well, this is a D and this is an R, or this is a blue and this is a red, and therefore I'm going to vote for this person knowing absolutely nothing else about them other than the fact that they're blue or red. And if you can boil it down to that, you know, blue or red, then you've really, like, people are not part, how, all right, so a democracy is of, for, and by the people, government by the consent of the governed, individuals taking shared responsibility and shaping their collective fate, right? Governing themselves by consenting to be governed by institutions that they indirectly influence through representation. So if the average person wants to have a voice in their democracy by voting for red or blue, what are they actually trying to say about how they want to be governed? What are they actually trying to say about how they want society to be shaped? And okay, you know, like, obviously that's kindergarten level critique, right? The next step up would be, well, you look at the issues. Okay, so what is an issue? How does one come to understand what an issue is? How does an issue enter the public forum? And what sort of thing could be considered an issue? And what do we do about it? And an issue is something that pops into the scene for us to talk about and make decisions about, and listen to this side of the issue and listen to that side of the issue, and then see what candidates support or don't support that issue, and then we can make choices about what candidates to support based on their stance on issues. So how do they pop in, and what do they pop in as? Well, one of them might be, can people get abortion? Can women get abortions? Okay, got it. So I am going to form an opinion on whether or not women should be legally allowed to have abortions and I'm going to uh, I'm going to form an opinion on whether that should or should not be. And then I'm going to look for candidates who have similar opinions on whether that should or should not be. And then I'm going to vote for those candidates based on whether I think that should or should not be. And then those candidates will enter office, and they will represent their constituents' views on this by either introducing legislation or voting on legislation that's probably in accordance with how the people who voted them into office based on that issue felt about that issue. All of that seems to be working, but at what point have we improved the material circumstances of society and now people are happy and everything's working and there's prosperity? How have we increased the lived experience, the material circumstances of citizens by focusing on an issue? So that's, for any issue, the point of this experiment is that we're trying to make a more perfect union. We're trying to collectively feel out what works and what doesn't work and go in the direction of the things that work. And they're, in doing so, benefit all of us collectively as a society and ensure prosperity for ourselves and our children. But we don't seem to be doing that because we're engaging on the level of issues that we don't even really seem to choose. Like, I don't remember at some point saying these are at like 16 years old or something, like reading a bunch of books about how society works and then walking out and saying, these are the issues that I think matter for society, and these are the positions I hold on these issues, and therefore these issues now belong to me as well as my opinion on them, and I will vote in accordance with those issues forever. No, they entered into my head externally. Like anything that you can think of as being an issue that is held in the positive or the negative by opposing political parties didn't make its way into my mind or didn't become a part of my internal beliefs about politics until it was introduced to me from the outside. So how did we come about the collection of publicly discussed issues, binary issues that we're in? And like that's for another time. The question should be, how do we have a better society, right? How do we prosper? How do we ensure prosperity for ourselves and for our children? How do we improve the material circumstances of everybody in the community? How do we advocate for a more perfect society? How do we get from where we are to where we need to be? And I mean, the answer obviously seems very simple. It's, well, first you study the subject matter. So if your subject matter is prosperous societies, then maybe one of the first things that you should do is you should look to historical precedent to see what are some examples of societies that thrived and societies that failed. In fact, what was the composition of all of these different societies throughout history, and how did they, people living in these societies do with respect to their own happiness and prosperity and well-being? And then you, after looking at historical precedent, you look at themes. Here's what we are seeing in all nations of this type or societies of this type, and here's what we're seeing in terms of different strata of lived experience in groups throughout those societies, and here are common themes among them. And what you start to develop is some ideology of, here's what I think I'm seeing. And then, like any good scientist, you would probably try to test those theories for significance to find out whether or not it just happens to be correlation that these things are occurring together, or whether there was actually some causation involved. And you should be able to, given the amount of historical precedent on these things, figure out uh, with some degree of confidence what's coincidence, what's pseudoscience, and what's actually observably affecting the well-being and prosperity of individuals and societies. And then what you have is a philosophy or a theory of society. And we have many people who have done those too. Uh, Theories of society is like everybody's first love, right? That's the things that we first get excited about in life. Um, the person whose theory on society that I enjoy the most in my entire life is Jesus of Nazareth. His theories on society were par excellence, the most enduring, wonderful, promising uh, thoughts that were had about society. So, you know, the world that Jesus Christ grew up into rejected him. And you might wonder, based on the things that he had to say and his theories of society, why he was rejected uh, by a combination of the intent or the permissiveness of the most significant powers that existed at the time. It was a time of significant powers, and he stood at the center of them. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing. But there have been many folks throughout history who have theorized uh, how to conduct a society, or how to construct a society, or how to maintain a society, how to incept a society. Um, and unfortunately, in America, we uh, at some point decided that this is not a thread we want to subscribe to anymore, because our education system seems to stop when it comes to theories on society up up into the 19th and 20th centuries, because at some point in the 19th and 20th centuries there came to be some ideologies that formed in response to the ideologies that ruled the world in the time of the British Empire, um, or that were being formulated in the time of the British Empire, I guess, coming into the world stage at the time of the British Empire, uh, that we didn't want to discuss openly in our society. We didn't want to teach to our children, and we didn't want to be a part of. And when we did that, what we were effectively doing was not just excluding some theories of society. We were saying we don't want to be a part of the discussion anymore on how to best organize society, which is such a shame. Like that, I can't think of a more important discussion to be a part of. Not to say that I necessarily am, a fan of, or supporting of, or subscribed to any particular ideology that's come about in the last 200 years, but the fact that we are not playing the game anymore hurts real bad. And by playing the game, I mean learning at a very young age that there are different ways to think about the way the world is organized, the way society is organized. There are certain things about our society that we just strain against in the same manner over and over and over again, saying, if only there were a better way. But unfortunately, there's not, because this is all that there's ever been, and this is all there can ever be. But it would be really nice if there could be a better way. It seems like there should be a better way, but there is no better way, and we'll never get to another better way. And this is all we will ever have forever, because this is all we ever have had, and yada yada yada, so on and so forth. I mean, we could at least engage children's curiosity, or college students' curiosity, as to, is there some other way that society could be organized, some other theory of society that might allow for the prosperity of ourselves and the prosperity of our children. And of course, obviously, when I'm talking about selective inclusion uh, of discussing ideology and theories on society. I'm saying that we don't take those far leftist ideas that came out from, the socialist movement leading on into Karl Marx and the sort of like evolving beyond capitalism and the critiques of capitalism in terms of socialism or communism. Those are things that we decided were not patriotic to discuss, and therefore we're not going to discuss them. But in not discussing them, we've sort of indicated that, like, well, we've come this far and we know over there is bad, so let's not go any further. By not go any further, we mean not explore the space of how to organize society at all. So we don't have any good philosophers. We don't have any good people who posit theories of society like Plato did, like Christ did. Because we kind of like said, well, if you dare go in that direction, you might end up like Marx. You might end up a communist. And I'm not saying you will, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'm actually really frustrated learning about socialism and communism because I'm tired of hearing about everything talked about in economic terms. I'm tired of hearing about class and class warfare. I'm tired of hearing about like the workers and the owners. It's compelling because it's an unavoidable circumstance that seems to really describe the world in a great way. But maybe if we talked about it a while, we could start to see the cracks and then move forward. But we can't because we're not going to talk about it, and therefore it's always going to be there, and it's always going to be some spooky thing that you shouldn't know too much about until you go learn about it, and then you're like, oh, actually this makes a lot of sense. And for many people, that's it. They're like, whoa, here's this forbidden knowledge that I've been kept from my whole life, and that must mean it's the answer because it makes so much sense. And okay, it's an answer, it's a theory, it's a hypothesis about the way things work, have worked, should work, can work, but there's no such thing as the ultimate thought in this regard. It is just an evolutionary response to the current conditions, current situation. And there are countries around the world that in various forms are either evolving or evolutionary or revolutionarily moving past capitalism into some sort of socialist condition or communist condition. Well, I get some sort of socialist condition, and are figuring out what that means. Again, we do not have on the planet Earth a perfect society. So obviously, we are not done talking about how to form a perfect society. And there's therefore nothing wrong with cracking a book on Karl Marx and trying to understand what he said, because what he said was not the answer, right? So why do we fear it so much? I mean, I know why some people would fear it, right? Because then they'd have to, then they'd be they'd be seen in a way they don't want to be seen. So that would happen, and that would be uncomfortable and awkward. But, okay, so yeah, all right, so, oh, that's not good. All right, anyway, how do we have a good society? So there's like this, please don't pop us. Please don't pop the zit and the money go everywhere. The theories on society, theories on good societies. I think I talked a couple of times so far that I am most excited about how technology, how communication, instantaneous mass communication, information sharing, assisted by systems that not only take massive amounts of data and spread it everywhere instantaneously to individual terminals that are populated by humans interacting continually and immediately, but also the fact that these systems contain some sort of intelligent components that allow for sorting and distribution. that requires no humans to do. So 100% of the humans participating in the system can be adding value to the system and participating in the conversation, as opposed to, some small number of people participating in this immense distributed conversation, and then the vast majority of them either storing data or moving it from one place to another, from one piece of paper to another, from one filing cabinet to another, or sitting on the phone and writing down notes, like all. And when a file is requested, then making a request to somebody else to say, like, do you guys have anything on this? And then them searching all the records to try to find relevant. All that's happening. There's no people involved in any of that, which means 100% of the people involved in this process can contribute to the actual conversation. And that makes representative government irrelevant, because now everyone can represent themselves immediately. So that's not necessary anymore. So if technology moves us beyond representation, what does that mean? And you can't take anything for granted, right? Because technology is not a fact of nature. Technology is not just the scientific knowledge that we now have that these things can exist. It's the logistical, real, actual systems, immense systems that require ownership and maintenance and continued attention to be used. So that means that if we do find the perfect way to have a non-representative democracy through Google Docs, Google can still turn the system off if they want. So, and if we found the perfect way to do it through some public work that the government has put together, then the government can still say this is not a representative form of government. This does not represent the values of republic, and this will not be done here. So, like, there's always somebody has to turn the light on, right? Like you have to. This is fun. This is a fun conversation. But I don't think we've ever been in a position before where we've been this close to having some means of 7 or 8 billion person Ouija board for a system of government. And is that good? And what are the things that need to be in place for it to be good? So I learned about a new book today that I'm really excited to read. It's called The Founder's Coup. Really excited to read Founder's Coup. I am not making significant progress in my book that I'm currently reading, so reminder to self, please do that. What do you mean when you like, if there was such a thing as a all of humanity Ouija board that we all moved slightly to suit our own interests as we felt, as we see fit, and that was our system of government, then what fail-safes would it have? And what does fail-safe mean? Like, I think what that means is, if the majority of people decide something that is bad by some objective measure, then somebody should be able to somehow come in and say this is bad, even though the majority of people want it. But if you're introducing that, then you really don't. It's really not a democracy, is it? Like, you can't have fail-safes for the will of the people and it be a democracy, because who breaks the tie? Who comes in and says this is not right? And on what basis do they make that decision? Is it a personal moral judgment? Is it a tradition-based moral judgment? Or is it a personal position-based judgment, a material judgment, a judgment about the relationship between the tie-breaking entity and the rest of humanity. I wish I was smarter, you know. I wish I could fit this stuff in my head. But and another thing that I'm finding out is that, again, I'm enjoying exploring some of these things because I feel like I've not had the opportunity to explore some of these things before for a great many reasons. The only reason I have the opportunity to explore these things now is because I have a decent job and I'm stuck at home. If it weren't for those two things in concert, three things. The world is ending. I have a decent job and I'm stuck at home. If I had a decent job and the world wasn't ending and I wasn't stuck at home, then I would just be enjoying my life. This would be great. Maybe I'd even like buy some stocks or open it, but I don't know what I'd like. I would be eating it up. I'd be all about it. I would probably maybe continue on in my previous assumptions and say, man, I must really be making it and I must be one of them now, you know, like and if I, you know, was stuck at home, if the pandemic was happening and I didn't have a good job, and the world wasn't ending, then maybe I would just, well, one, I wouldn't have any free time, and I'd be working all the time. And any free time I did have, I'd probably spend playing video games trying to forget that anything was wrong. But it's the combination of things, you know, like you've got time because you don't have to work outside of your normal work hours, and you've got a home that you live in and you don't have to be, you know, constantly on alert, working some shared space or defending some shared space or even socializing with anybody, I guess. And things seem like they were absolutely terribly awful in the 24 hours news cycle for several years in a row. So that is like you become drawn and driven to collecting a library of material about what the hell is wrong. You know, like that becomes the driving thing. So it was all those combination things in combination that allowed me to experience what I'm experiencing now, and that itself is not the end, right? Like I was saying the other day, this is not an opportunity to pat myself on the back and say I've been to the mountaintop and I've had some knowledge and I'm gonna go do something with it. It's like, no, this is an opportunity to be a normal, average, everyday informed citizen, and I still am not there yet because I'm still trying to catch up on the body of knowledge that existed well before I was born. You put me in a real conversation about something like the Keystone XL pipeline, right? And you're like, okay, well, here's, you know, this company's position and that company's position, and the government of Canada and the different states and provinces of Canada, and then the peoples in the United States, and the where the business is going to move and how, and what the environmental factors are, and what, you know, people have feelings about climate change and whether or not fossil fuels are sustainable, both, you know, like in an economic sense, but also in an environmental sense. And here are the jobs, and here are the international relationships and geopolitical relationships, and how they will be adjusted based on, you know, the influx of money from one company to another, from one country to another, and the standard of living, and how what groups will be affected, and how they will vote as a result, or what actions they will take, if they're a labor union or if they're a community that's highly influenced by like, you know, insurgency type rhetoric. You know, what starts as being a very simple question about a current event very quickly draws, like, you start to realize, oh gosh, this is going to draw on every ounce of theory and precedent that I could possibly have, and it's not going to be a very simple answer. You have to answer for all of these different things simultaneously, and you have to be able to weigh their relative importance, and defensively. Or you can just you can just shout the same thing over and over again, and you'll get voted for. You'll keep your position. You'll stay in office. You can say, um, American industry and American jobs are the greatest thing that we can ever hope to, have here in this country, and we believe in free markets, and we believe in good American business, and folks like, I don't know, whoever is Standard Oil now, represent us in the global market. These are good American values and people, and let's all do good for each other. And you can, and you don't have to necessarily understand anything, but you've articulated a position, and you'll get voted for because you've said all the right words. Or you can say, sustainable future energy and climate change and global warming and indigenous peoples and fossil fuels and big industry and capitalism and exploitation of good American workers and the decrease of the standard of living for most Americans while an increase in profit shares go up, and you will also get voted for. And you will also not have really said anything beyond theory or rhetoric. You need these people to look at the situation and understand what the actual outcomes are going to be. And that's going to take somebody who understands theories of how societies are constructed and improved in order to figure that out. And you need everybody to come to the table earnestly representing the desire to make society better. And there's no prerequisite that is who would take office. In fact, it seems to be quite the opposite. We reward people who quickly and adamantly espouse a position, especially one that's easily identifiable, and especially one that is societally tenable because it already aligns to existing issues that people are talking about because they saw it on TV. So one, people are talking about the issues that they see on TV, and two, the people who run well-funded campaigns get elected. That's the truth. There's a one-to-one relationship between the dollars spent in campaigning and the votes earned for candidates. So I guess you could say the dollars vote, and some people have more than $1 to vote with. So there is no prerequisite. In fact, it quite works against you if you were to try to take office as someone who has theories on making a better society, or at the very least is grounded in a desire to make society better and has some background to bring to the table in the context of current events to try to understand what's happening and how we get from where we are to where we want to be. Doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist in our representation because it doesn't exist in us. Because we choose our representation. And we have no flipping clue how society works or should work either. Because that's missing from our, for lack of a better word, education. But we have YouTube. So everything I've ever learned, I learned on YouTube. I have a good job because of YouTube. I have a big brain because of YouTube. Good time to be alive. All right, I'm going to cut it off. It's been fun, everybody. I'm looking forward to doing this again. Good night.